I was like,
I bet I'm one of those.
I should just start going with that reason all the time. All right. Finally done with the book, huh? You're not turning the book in, because we're gonna have another project that will serve as your test grade. We'll talk about that at the end. But we'll start going through what we got today. Before we dive in, questions? Pretty clear on what happens at the end, at least in terms of, if not thematic meaning or everything else, but you know, like the plot points, like what occurs through the end of this. All right. Then, since we've had a chance to take in the whole story, and we've mentioned some of these points of the call of the hero's journey throughout. Now that we're finished, I think we can kind of start. Just set it on the ground. Yeah. She spikes it, it explodes all over the place. We can get a chance now to kind of look back at the entire hero's journey and see how stuff fits in. Because I think that will help tie everything back together, give us some direction through this last part, and then help us tie this last conversation with Granger in with some of the other stuff we've discussed as well. So, remember, everything starts and ends with status quo, which means what?
normal.
Yeah, normal, everyday. Somebody brought up a High School Musical song, right? I don't know that song. That is an illusion I did not get. But apparently, it helped people understand what status quo is. So, you know, bully for High School Musical, I guess. So it's the normal everyday existence, which for Montag at the beginning is what? What you say? He's a fireman, right? What's he do? Burns books. He serves really as a method of law enforcement by ridding the world of contraband material, right? So, let's go with blue. Fireman. And then he is issued the call to adventure, which comes from a herald. And who is that for us? Whoa, that got gigantic. There we go. The herald. Who's our herald?
Clarice.
Clarice. All right, and she does this by asking what question?
Are you happy?
All right, she asks him if he's happy. It is that question alone that launches his journey. And in a way here, she also serves, that is the worst looking arrow ever, but it's okay, right? It's no Oliver Queen. She serves as a helper here also, right? She's both helper and herald. Are you happy? And this is the question where Montag's like, wait, what's going on in my life? Now, and then we get to this first threshold crossing, okay? In which he has to go from the world of his normal everyday life into a special world, a world of adventure. Now, the threshold, remember, is guarded to keep people from just going back and forth, okay? And there's lots of different events according to that book, right? Joseph Campbell's Hero with 1,000 Faces. Different events that can serve as a crossing of the threshold. Brother battle, dragon battle, dismemberment, crucifixion, abduction, night sea journey, wonder journey, even the whale's belly, if you remember the story of Jonah and the whale, amongst others. All of these are ways that we can cross the threshold. I like to conceptualize Montag's crossing of the threshold as a dragon battle, because I really think of his threshold crossing being when the woman burns herself. Do you remember the scene I'm talking about? At that point in time, Montag looked at the world and there was no denying for him that something was fundamentally wrong once he watched her commit that act, right? He could have buried his head in the sand and, you know what, I am happy. I'm going to ignore this weird teenage girl from across the street. There was no ignoring anything else from this point forward. Why do I think of it as a dragon battle? Well, what are the characteristics we know of a dragon?
Fire.
Fire! Boom! That's a really good one. What else?
They.
Bad dragon.
Okay, typically they're viewed as bad, right?
To hoard things.
Hoard things. What did she hoard?
Books.
She hoarded books, knowledge, right? She had her treasure trove of knowledge. And instead of a cave, she did have her house, her lair, right? And so we look at the lair, the house, the cave, the abundance of treasure, which for her was her books, the fire and the willingness to die before she let that be taken away. You kind of see the mythological images of the dragon. But through this dragon battle, and Montag slays the dragon in a metaphoric sense, even if she actually commits suicide, because we counted that as one of our suicides, he's crossed this threshold. He's like, something's wrong. I can't go back to my everyday life anymore. Okay? Now, shortly after that, because this is all in part 1, Hearth and the Salamander, he has his first conversation with Beatty, who attempts to be a helper. And Beatty here is known Montag the longest, probably other than Mildred, serves as kind of a father figure role model as his boss. Okay? Shortly after that, in part 2, we meet another helper. So we had Beatty up here as a mentor type figure. And we meet another mentor slash helper, and who was that? Father, right? Mentor. And he was a mentor. If we think about this, well, we'll get to the childhood, adolescent stuff. He's a mentor as well. We got a series of tests. We could look at those tests as being reading poetry to Mildred's friends, coming up with a plan to get rid of the firemen, just learning to think with Faber's aid. All of these different skill sets he accrued. Okay? And then we get to the bottom, and here's really where part 2, the sieve and the sand, ends. As we begin to look at the approach. Right? And the approach is where the hero gets closest to the cave. The cave is when they are at their darkest hour, and when they are also fundamentally furthest from where they were at the beginning of the story, way up here at the moment. Often considered kind of the climax. So from there, let's dive into part 3 and see what happens through the rest of this. Okay? At the beginning of part 3, burning bright, where are we located?
Montag's house.
Montag's house. And what are we there for?
To burn his house.
So he can burn his own house. Man, that's rough, isn't it? He gets a call. He thinks he's undercover. He's got the earbud in his ear. Hops on the fire truck. And then they arrive. Bum, bum, bum. He's like, what the crap? And who rushes out of the house? Mildred, right? Mildred, she ran past with her body stiff, her face floured with powder, her mouth gone without lipstick. Mildred, you didn't put in the alarm. She shoved the valise and the waiting beetle, climbed in and sat mumbling, poor family, oh, everything gone, everything gone now. Is Mildred's family life over? Right? All of her memories in the house, the relationship she has with her husband, all of that is gone. Right? And if you think about when you lose something important, and I'm specifically thinking about house fires, because that's what's about to happen here. Like, I could replace my TV and my couch, right? I couldn't replace the Christmas ornaments we got for my boys for their first Christmas. I could buy them again, but they wouldn't be the ones that hung on the tree, right? Or it wouldn't be the ones they made at daycare that have their like little footprints on them. Even if I remade them, they wouldn't be the same size, right? The photo albums that contain pictures of me and my brother, can't replace those. And even just thinking of the place, like the way the room that is their nursery smells, I'll never be able to replace that smell. Right? That's the stuff that will be gone forever. When Mildred says, poor family, oh, everything gone, everything gone now, is that what she means? Who does she call her family throughout all of this? Yeah, the TV, the parlor family, right? She is lamenting the loss of the people on the other side of the television. Mildred's words are correct, but the concept those words relate to in her brain is not. And that is ironic and immensely sad to think about what it is that she's going to miss. She's not going to miss Montag. She's going to miss the TV that he purchased for her, right? And she darts out with that last thought. And that's really where we can define the approach, because he's beginning to get to the cave. Now, in terms of destruction of this house, typically they would douse it in kerosene and use a match. Instead, how are we going to go about burning this house? Oh yeah. Man. Flamethrowers. They're crazy. And who all is going to participate? Just Montag. He's going to have to flamethrower burn his own house. All by himself. Right? And Beatty hands him this flamethrower. Right? Montag goes about, the house fell in red coals and black ash. It bedded itself down in sleepy pink-gray cinders, and a smoke plume blew over it. Right? Montag stood with the flamethrower in his limp hands, great islands of perspiration drenching his armpits, his face smeared with soot. Then he asked if the wife turned in the alarm, and Beatty says yes, she did. But the friend's turn went in first, so he was gotten either way, right? Do you think that was emotionally draining for Montag to burn his own house? I imagine not only is it physically tiring work with the heat and everything else, but I imagine emotionally that would be rough as well. Then Montag has his moment in the cave, deepest darkness, the fight. Who does he have to fight and face? Beatty, right? What ultimately happens to Beatty? He gets burned. What happened in Montag's head to cause him to burn Beatty? What kind of stuff?
He was egging him on. Yeah.
All right, needling him, egging him on. Beatty was prodding him to go forward, wasn't he? So, and on multiple levels. At first, he calls him an idiot, calls him a damn fool. At one point, calls him a fumbling snob. In addition to just making him complete the task, that is psychological and emotional damage, right? That's knocking Montag down. Is there any physical damage that Beatty deals to Montag? Yeah, he punches him, slaps him, right? Beatty struck him a blow on the head that sent him reeling back. The next sentence, what was the result of him getting hit in the head? Yeah, the earbud comes out. At which point Beatty grabs it and says what? If you look in, pop your books over.
He knew it was there.
All right, he knew it was here. He saw him tilting his head.
Yeah.
What's he going to do with that green bullet?
He's gonna track him down to see who's on the
Track
other
who
side.
down?
Faber.
Father. Now, this is worth noting. Montag, for all intents and purposes, has no wife, does he? Clarice? Gone. Who's he got left?
Nothing, just Faber.
Faber, Faber. I don't know which one's the right one. I don't know which one you hear in your head. I'll say them both. But Professor Faber, all he has left. You can say a lot to me. The moment you tell me you're going to hunt down my wife and kids, you will meet a different person. Right? Montag's taken emotional abuse. He's taken the physical exhaustion of doing this himself, knowing he was going to be punished. He's taken the physical abuse of getting punched. But then he tells him he's going to go after somebody else. Right? Beatty says, now I'm going to go after Faber. We'll get him too. Right? You start to see this pile up. Like, at what point did Montag not have another decision? So he does. And even Beatty says, go ahead now, you second-hand literature, pull the trigger. And what's the next sentence? He took
one step towards one.
He closes that physical distance. That's a threat, right? When you close physical distance on somebody and encroach in their space, that in and of itself is a threat, right? So he says, pull the trigger and moves closer to him. We never burned right. Hand it over, Guy, Beatty said with a fixed smile, and then he was a shrieking blaze, a jumping, sprawling, gibbering mannequin, no longer human or known, all writhing flame on the lawn as Montag shot one continuous pulse of liquid fire on him. Look at the last sentence. Beatty flopped over and over and over, and at last twisted in on himself like a charred wax doll and lay silent. This is much different than the way burning was described at the beginning of the book, wasn't it? It was a pleasure to burn. Remember how beautiful that imagery was? And here you have this, like, horrid image. It's like, hand it over. Like, you want the flame? There you go. Now, ultimately, Montag didn't kill anybody else. He said the other firemen didn't move, and he pretty much just whopped him over the head and knocked him unconscious, right? So we do see this in Montag, like, he's not willing to kill the other people, just Beatty. And if you look up, you don't have to look now because we'll come to it. Montag eventually says Beatty wanted to die. In the middle of crying, Montag knew it for the truth. Beatty had wanted to die. And that is worth noting, that we can see Beatty doing all of this to Montag to get Montag to the point to finally do it, right? To finally kill him. So what we have, and this is again in Campbell's Hero's Journey, when we talk about this inner dark cave, we really get a combination here. Though the readily apparent one is this idea of Father Atonement. Sometimes it's positive, sometimes it's negative. And we think Luke Skywalker and Darth Vader in Return of the Jedi, positive. Darth Vader ends up coming back and sacrificing his life to protect Luke so that Luke can step in and kind of take that role, right? Here, Beatty as the father figure, but also as a symbol of tyranny, right? Of ultimate control, of the tyrant king, tyrant father holding the people down. Montag has to burn that so that it can be replaced by something new. And here's where you get like the references later on to the Phoenix, for instance. So Beatty has to die here. And we see that ultimately he's committing suicide. He's not even happy with his own tyrannical ways, but he doesn't know how to do anything else. So Montag gets rid of him. And then we have our flight. So the escape. Think Jack and the Beanstalk, right? Jack gets out, he's got to run from the giant, get all the way back down. There's often a magical escape, a chase scene that occurs at the end. Indiana Jones, the temple's collapsing around him, he's got to get out. What are we fleeing from in this book? The Hound, right? The Hound is our pursuing agent. Man, it's also like the Hounds of Hell, isn't it? Like Cerberus. Or, you know, there's so many different dogs throughout literature, but, you know, in that dark place of fire and fear, and then you're trying to get back across in the normal world, the Hound is chasing you the entire way. What serves is our threshold in which we escape. The river. And we see, if you flip to that, let me see your book real quick and I'll tell you what page it is. Coals, black ash, 2 dozen flurried away. At some point in here, it also mentions top of 133, right? That the war is also started. That'll become important, but we'll hear that you can find a line in here that says war has begun. All right, so 133 for you. But he was at the river. He touched it just to be sure it was real. He waded in, stripped in darkness to the skin, splashing his body, arms, legs, and head with raw liquor, drank it, snuffed up his nose. Then he dressed in Faber's old clothes and shoes, got rid of his stuff, dressed in somebody else's. Tossed his own clothing into the river, watched it swept away. Holding the suitcase, he walked out into the river until there was no bottom, and he was swept away in the dark. What does water symbolize?
Freedom.
What?
Like baptism.
Baptism, what'd you say?
Like purity.
Purity. A method of reclaiming purity, of cleansing through baptism. The most famous baptism in all of history. You know who? It's kind of one of the first. It would be Christ by John the Baptist, when John the Baptist baptized Christ. And what was the body of water?
The Jordan River.
The Jordan River, right? So we got a lot of this rivers, and rivers were places of cleaning in every culture. Like if you look in India, even now today, you can look at these major rivers that were source of lifeblood and cleansing. Here it also serves as a metaphoric and physical threshold between the special world, right, that world of adventure, and safety, between the city and the woods, between the pursuit of the hound. Here, but in order for that to happen, Montag has to step in, get rid of everything that he was, right? Everything that existed here, toss that off, put on the clothes of favor, the man who read, right? And be done with that, in a sense, adolescence, and become an adult version, go through that threshold, be washed and cleansed by it, before he can come through on the other side. Right? And he does. And you'll see on the other side, he meets up with, what did I look at? Here we go. Right? This was the river. Who's he meet up with here?
Granger and two other dudes.
All right. What is particular about these dudes?
They're all like old professors and authors and such.
Okay, professors and authors. What characteristic do each one of them share?
They have memory of a book.
all have memory.
Say that again.
They have the memory of a book in their mind.
Yeah, they're all book people, right? Can we call these the book people? They all have memorized some sort of book, okay? And they're serving as helpers and guides. And if you look, let's see, my page 149, but you'll have where they're talking about somebody standing in for Montag. Because as far as everybody in the city is concerned, what happens to Montag?
He does.
They think he dies, right? The search is over. Montag is dead. A crime against society has been avenged. Why do they need Montag to die?
Because they can't let people know that someone rebelled and actually succeeded.
All right, you can't let them, because that could encourage other people, make you doubt the extreme authority of the system. So for the system's own sake, you can't let anybody find out that somebody got away with revolting, okay? Now, Granger goes on to say, they didn't show the man's face. Did you notice even your best friends wouldn't be able to tell? Granger touched Montag's arm. Welcome back from the dead. So we have a threshold crossing and a resurrection of Montag into a new life, right? He has died and then he comes back to life. Died on the other side of the river, resurrected into a new life here. And then what happens to the city?
It gets
It gets blown up.
It gets blown up, right? And so at the end, after the city's blown up, where are Montag and the book people heading?
To the community.
Back to the city. For what purpose?
See if there's anybody left.
All right, to see if there's anybody alive, to offer assistance to the survivors, and what else? Do you think? That's probably the big one. But what other purpose do you think they'll serve?
Look for any leftover books.
All right, leftover books and bring knowledge back, right? Knowledge and know-how. And that's this elixir. When we think about somebody stealing a magic potion, Montag, the potion he and all these other people will be bringing back is this potion of knowledge and memory, right? That's what they need to return. And then he will essentially establish a new status quo. Could you imagine a sequel to this? Right? In which Montag's day-to-day life wouldn't be to necessarily burn books, but to go out into the ruins of the city and see if he could help, what he could do. Right? Now, does anybody remember what book Montag became? Ecclesiastes. You familiar with Ecclesiastes?
A little bit.
All right. Now, the interesting thing here is to note, could Bradbury have had Montag become any book at all?
Yes.
Right. So as an author, why pick that allusion? Well, Ecclesiastes is a part of a group of the books in the Bible known as the wisdom books. Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, Psalms. I'm going to read for you a couple of verses out of Ecclesiastes, if you're not familiar with it, just to see if you can understand why this book thematically might tie in with this story. For the greater my wisdom, the greater my grief. To increase knowledge only increases sorrow. Right?
You say that.
Hmm?
Say it again.
The greater my wisdom, the greater my grief. To increase knowledge only increases sorrow. Two people can accomplish more than twice as much as one. They get a better return. If one person falls, the other one can reach out and help. But people who are alone when they fall are in real trouble. A good reputation is more valuable than expensive perfume. It is better to be criticized by a wise person than praised by a fool. Sorrow is better than laughter, for sadness has a refining influence on us. A wise person thinks much about death, while the fool thinks only about having a good time now. Right? So we think thematically what Bradbury would seek to reinforce with this being the book of Montag, or Montag is the book of Ecclesiastes. It's interesting to go back and see the juxtaposition of themes and content. And then probably the most famous part of Ecclesiastes, there's a time for everything, a season for every activity under the heaven, a time to be born and a time to die, a time to plant, a time to harvest, and it goes on. That's even been turned into a song. So when we can look at this advancement in knowledge as what Montag can bring back. And not just knowledge in terms of like how to fix a car, but knowledge in terms of wisdom for how to live life. Now, from there, we can really begin to dive in to our conversation. So, part one, remember, childhood, ineptitude and ignorance, right? And Beatty was our mentor there, History of the Firemen. He told us that variety decreased as the population increased. So did the time to reflect as technology increased. Because there was less variety and less time to reflection, people became incapable of handling negative influence or negative stimuli on their own. They asked for anything that made them feel bad to be gotten rid of. We're looking at censorship as a request from the ground up, and he specifically hit inferiority, offense, and sadness. Okay? And in that, we also had Montag tell us that sometimes we should really be bothered. You can see that as the cracks. Number two, adolescence. Rebellion as an engine both for changing the world and as a mechanism for establishing your own identity. And that was what was happening in number two through what we'll call, and obviously I'm not talking about Montag's literal age here, I'm talking about him as stages of his character development, but he sought to establish his own identity, and he begins to think, I want to change the world. Faber tells us in this conversation what it is that we're missing. What is absent from this world? What's the whole? Oddly enough, if we look backwards, we can see that Beatty's conversation tells us how it went missing, right? And Faber's what is missing? This history tells us how it went missing. There's no good information. Remember, variety died. There's no time to think about the information. That went away with technology. And then 1 and 2, if I have good information and the time to think about it, the third one is I need the ability to act based on the combination of 1 and 2. Once I have good information and I really can digest it, I then need to be able to act on that. And then on my page 87, shortly after Faber tells us that, he says, remember the things you're looking for, Montag, are in the world, but the only way the average chap will ever see 99% of them is in a book. Don't ask for guarantees. Don't look to be saved in any one thing. Do your own bit of saving. And if you drown, at least die knowing you're headed for shore. Okay? So we can see that through this conversation, we need to act. But there's no guarantees and you have to save yourself. There's no guarantee that you're going to save yourself. Right? Now, the difference between childhood and adolescence, or, Montag is the adolescent, is what really separates a child from an adolescent?
Intelligent.
What?
Intelligent.
All right.
Understand.
For sure. If I had a child and an adolescent up here, would you be able to visually tell the difference?
Yes.
Why?
Because one's smaller than the other.
What happens?
You grow.
All right, so at what point, what hits?
Puberty.
Puberty. right? Which is like a physical hormonal change, right? And you get a change in body development. So I can look at a kid and say, like, that's a child or that's an adolescent. Relatively easy to spot the difference. However, somebody in late adolescence, are they as easy to tell the difference as somebody in early adulthood? The physical similarities in late adolescence and early adulthood are much smaller. It's tougher to tell the difference between an adolescent and an adult than it is a child and an adolescent, right? Because there's a marked difference in the first separation stages. The second separation is due mainly to what? What separates an adolescent from a child, from an adult?
Like mental
Age.
mental, what's it called? Growth, I guess.
All right, mental growth, sure. Knowledge, wisdom, mental acuity.
Stability.
Hmm?
Mental stability.
Mental stability, yeah, I really like that one. There's a level of consistency there, right? And there's not necessarily a direct age. We say 18, but I mean, 18 does not signify adulthood. Like, it doesn't. Do you know what I mean? And yeah, you can vote and do a bunch of stuff, but I'm not really comfortable saying that everybody, when they hit 18, I trust them like a full-on adult. No, sir. No, ma'am. Right?
Also, the brain.
So, why do I point that out? What were you going to say?
So the brain doesn't even reach full maturity until like late 20s.
Mid-20s, around, yeah, mid-20s, 25-ish, I think is the average when you look at the settling down of your amygdala, which is your emotional regulation center in your brain. And it kind of hits its chemical makeup that will maintain itself for the most of the rest of your life. When you become what you would be your baseline neurology, you know, for the rest of your life, that's typically around your mid-20s. So why do I say this? Because childhood to adolescence is a relatively marked division. Boom, you just got hormones. Puberty is it. Things are changing, right? You should be aware of this. Should be relatively immediate for you in that concept. The shift from adolescent to adulthood is a little more gradual. And why do I bring that up? Because if we look at what Faber told us, the end of adolescence is the beginning of adulthood. All right, so let's dive into what Granger is saying. And Granger, I think you're on, may I see yours real quick? One more time? 56 million. $149. All right? 149. Adulthood is going to be characterized by acceptance. Rebellion as an engine to change the world, establish identity. Adulthood acceptance. Acceptance doesn't mean you're comfortable with things the way they are. It means that you understand what you can and cannot change and how it is that you can make a difference. Right? And you kind of accept and step into your role. You look reality in the face. You don't hide it. And you address the problems as they really are. Okay? You understand your own limits and capabilities. You understand the limits and capabilities that present themselves in the world. And that's really what Granger is going to dive into. And so before we get into this, it is worth noting, did Montag do anything at all to change the nature of the civilization he existed in?
Not unless someone survived.
Well, even then, I mean, look, he wanted to hide books and burn firehouses, or burn firemen's houses. Did any of his actions result in the change, the fundamental change of his culture?
No.
Another outside force that he did not control influenced that, right? So he had to accept whether or not he could change everything. Now he's going to have to deal with the fact that the culture is the way it is. What's he going to do to help? This is where Granger steps in. And Granger begins by speaking of his grandfather, which I think is a beautiful speech and helps remember people that we love and have lost. Everyone must leave something behind when he dies, my grandfather said. A child, or a book, or a painting, or a house, or a wall built, or a pair of shoes made, or a garden planted. Something your hand touched, some way so that your soul has somewhere to go when you die. And he says it doesn't matter what you do, so long as you change something from the way it was before you touched it into something that's like you after you take your hands away. The first thing Granger is telling us is that we must interact meaningfully. See how this builds on this number 3? So far, both of our number 3s have been a combination of 1 and 2. Have you noticed that? Well, here, we're going to pick this argument up. And Granger actually is smoothly going to transition it into a more developed concept that brings you into adulthood, instead of the marked change that exists between childhood and adolescence. It's not just that we need the ability to act based on this, but that action needs to be meaningful. Right? He uses the term of the garden. The difference between the man who just cuts lawns and a real gardener is in the touching. Has anybody ever seen the gardens at Biltmore or been to Biltmore Estates by chance? A couple people? Awesome. What about Hatcher Gardens downtown? Anybody through there? Yeah. None of those look like my yard. I just cut the grass. Right? I got a lot to do. But the people that take care of those gardens are very particular about how they interact with them. Those interactions are meaningful. Granger tells us, my grandfather's been dead for all these years, but if you lifted my skull, by God, in the convolutions of my brain, you'd find big ridges of his thumbprints. He touched me. As I said earlier, he was a sculptor. I hate a Roman named Status Quo. Status quo is what? The normal. Right? He goes, I hate the normal. Stuff your eyes with wonder. Live as if you would drop dead in 10 seconds. See the world. It's more fantastic than any dream made or paid for in factories. To interact meaningfully means every action is intentional. We don't know the time of our death. We don't. I'm really hoping that for me, it's between the ages of 95 and 108. And that I kiss my wife on the cheek, go to sleep, and never wake up again. If I had my preferences, that's how I would like to go. But I don't have that preference, do I? Nobody does. And we always imagine that we have tomorrow. But, like he says, you have to live as if you would drop dead in 10 seconds. If you're going to bother doing something, bother doing it like it's the last act you might get to do. Do it well. Do it meaningfully. When you interact with people, make sure that it's with intent. If you're going to go about creating something, do so intentionally. Right? We don't want just to go through doing things because we have always done them, or do things mindlessly. Right? When you play the violin, or as the grandfather did, or, I don't know, bake, tell a joke, you want to make sure that it is with a purpose and with all of your attention. Because the next point is just like Faber told us here. Ask no guarantees. Ask for no security. It's interesting when an author tells us a couple things more than once. Ask for no guarantees. You are not promised anything. Right? And if you live as if you're promised things, then you'll never take full advantage of what you have. There is never such an animal as security or guarantees. And if there were, it would be related to the great sloth, which hangs upside down in a tree all day, every day, sleeping its life away. To hell with that, he said. Shake the tree. Knock the great sloth down on his ass. Right? You ask for guarantees. You think everything's safe. You run your life on autopilot. You're essentially sleeping your life away. No guarantees. Interact meaningfully. Wake your life up. And just like in the call to adventure, right, the hero's journey, go out on your adventure, but that requires you to face the problems of the world with acceptance, to look at them straight in the eye and go about taking care of them. They continue to talk for a while. Then we get to a part about the phoenix. I think it's 1 or 2 pages ahead for you. Granger looked into the fire. Phoenix. What? There was a silly damn bird. And it talks about the phoenix who would burn himself and then would regenerate. But he never knew what was going on or why it is that he had been burned. Granger goes on to say, and this is our last point, it's a combination of 1 and 2, just like everything else was. 1 plus 2 equals. He says, and hold on to one thought. You are not important. You are not anything. Someday the load we're carrying with us may help someone. And that is important because what Granger is telling us is that our importance is based on action. Yesterday was Mother's Day, right? And whether it was a grandmother or an aunt or a stepmother, hopefully there's a figure in your life that you respect and love that has done a lot to nurture and take care of you. And then I think next month is Father's Day. There's a Grandparents' Day, but any of these, or a birthday for somebody you care about. If you were to wake up yesterday morning and say, and just think to yourself laying in bed, I'm so thankful for Mom. She's done a lot for me. I really appreciate her. Would that thought have been enough? Why not?
Because you didn't act on that thought.
All right. So why do you need to act on that thought?
So
Other
you did
people-
that is
To show her that you appreciate her? What else did I hear?
Other people don't know that you're thinking.
All right. Other people don't know. It is through action, and speech is a form of action, right? That we manifest our mind in reality. We create the reality in which we exist by acting and by speaking. That's why you have to be precise in your language and don't lie, or always tell the truth, or at least don't lie. I'm stealing those from Jordan Peterson. But in order to create your reality, you have to act. If you were in a coma and all you were thoughts, you're not really existing in a reality or creating a reality around you. So we need to understand that the importance of what we do is based on action. So in order for that thought to matter, we then have to go tell Mom, like, Mom, I love you. And then act on that. Act as if we really do, because the words without the action become less valuable, right? You ever had somebody that told you they do something and didn't? And then they did that again and again, and eventually their words are meaningless? Words aren't meaningless so long as they're backed up with action. Because you know there's somebody out there that when they tell you they'll do something, they do it. And their word is worth its weight in gold, right? But our importance is based on our action, right? You cannot just exist in a world of ideas. You can't sit back and think to yourself, oh, these are all the good things I want to do. You have to do them. And if you interact meaningfully, and you know that there are no guarantees, and you ask for none, what you will have done is establish your long-lasting importance to the people around you, right? You'll created the ripples in the lake because that was based on your action, your ability to go out into the world. For Montag, it was to carry that elixir, right, of knowledge back into the people that needed it. So, and that's where we wrap up at the end. Finally, in adulthood and acceptance, Montag knowing his place, knowing what he can do to help, right? He doesn't have to change the world. He just has to go back and help who he can. Questions? All right. That leaves you with what we should do. All right. Let me pause this real quick, and then we'll talk about your assignment.